Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we will be speaking about Hugo Chavez, the president of Venezuela. He died a couple of days ago. Hugo Chavez, he is the president of the poor, president of the people. People either like him a lot or they hate him a lot. Just like any other politicians, you're going to find people who agree with him, people who like him, and people who do not. Well, the same thing goes with Hugo Chavez. Now, I happen to actually like the guy. He was a great president, a great man, and a great human being. Now, most people think that if you are to like one of those people like Chavez or Morales or any of the other presidents out there in South America or around the world, if they are against imperialists and Zionists, then you're probably a leftist, or you're probably a communist, or at least a socialist. Well, I'm neither of the above. I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, I'm not whatever those terms means, and I am not, definitely, I'm not a communist. So, having said that, and because I've seen on one of the pages of one of my friends that said something about communists are mourning the death of Hugo Chavez. Well, it's not just communists. It's a lot of people are mourning the death of this man. Maybe because of his story, his profound story, how he came to power from the ghettos of Venezuela. He was born in 1954, made it to the army, graduated back in the 1970s, late 70s. And in 1997, he started a political party. Before he did that, in the middle of the 1990s, he tried to take power the old-fashioned way, which is a military coup. That did not work, and he was thrown in jail. Came out of jail a year later, he started the fifth party in Venezuela. A year later, he won the election. Actually, 2 years later. He started the party in 1997, and in 1999, he became he was elected the president of Venezuela. And he has been ruling Venezuela since that time. Back in 2002, the poverty rate was at 48.9% in Venezuela. One of his goals was equality between the people. He used the wealth of Venezuela, which is the fifth largest exporter of oil. He used the wealth to advance his country, to help his people. He was the president of the poor. In 2011, the poverty rate in Venezuela was down to 28%. That is an accomplishment. Now, some people might think it's not, but bringing down the poverty level from being half of the population of Venezuela. And let's not forget, at that time, Venezuela has always been an exporter of oil. So there was no reason for a rich country to have half of its people poor and living in poverty. But as it was, that's how it was. And Chavez came to power through elections. So there are other ways. I guess he always wanted to become president. He tried the military coup. He tried violence. Well, not really violence, but you can call it that. A military coup is a military coup, but he was thrown in jail. I don't think he got far. But when he started his political party, the people followed. 2 years later, he was the president of his country. I think there's a good lesson that we can learn here, because the grip on power by the two parties with one system, because two parties have the same handlers, it's not working for us. So we're probably looking for someone to come through from us, we the people, not we the billions of dollars, that is. So Hugo Chavez, like I said, he had a lot of enemies, just like anyone else. You're going to have people who like you and people who despise you. He was not actually too thrilled and too fond of the United States, especially even though he was selling his oil to the United States. And as a matter of fact, one time when things got when gas was very expensive in the United States, Hugo Chavez and his Citgo companies in the United States, that's who he was selling his gas through, he was cheaper than anyone else to help the people of the United States, and he said it. He said it. Chavez tried to help many people around the world. Definitely he was a supporter of the Palestinian people. Maybe now you can see the bias of why I like Hugo Chavez, because he was one of the biggest, strongest supporters of the Palestinian people. When Israel attacked the Palestinians, killed many of them in Gaza, Hugo Chavez kicked out the Israeli ambassador to his country, and he shut down his embassy in Tel Aviv. He took a stand where our own president and our own politicians would not dare to take. It does not matter how many children Israel kills. Our politicians cannot do anything. This man went through against all the odds and all the powers and supported the little guy. It is true that he had introduced socialism into his country. It is true that he became the number one, actually what he termed as socialism of the 21st century. It's a little bit different. It was more democracy, spent a lot of money on health care. Yes, he socialized health care. And yes, he did go after education big time, where illiteracy rate in his country, he had worked so hard to get his people educated, and many of the people who could not make it to college during the other regime before him were able to. Now, again, if you happen to be one of those people who don't like Hugo Chavez, I understand, because politicians, you either like them or you hate them. You can't go in between. And Hugo Chavez was definitely a man who was liked and loved by many people, not just inside his country, but around the world, because of his policies and because of him standing for the little guy, standing for the weak, standing for the poor, standing for the oppressed against all odds. Well, we do have, he died, and like we said earlier, and we do have a couple of videos that want to show you exactly what took place in the last couple of days in Venezuela, for those of you who are interested in seeing what Venezuela went through in the last couple of days. Let's do it.
Hugo Chavez.
After 2 years of illness and weeks of uncertainty, the official announcement came that the Venezuelan president is dead.
After a battle against his hard illness,
during the course of almost 2 years with the love of the country and the blessings of the country and the absolute loyalty of his colleagues and the love of all his family, we transmit our pain and solidarity.
Hugo Chavez had been in power for 14 years, but during that time became more than a president to many Venezuelans. Supporters gathered on the streets of Caracas trying to absorb the news, many of them in shock, some in mourning. Soon after the announcement, the Minister of Defense appeared on television. He pledged his support and that of the military for Vice President Maduro, who Chavez had named as his successor.
Unidad, unidad, unidad.
We ask for unity from the whole nation. The armed forces guarantees the constitution. We guarantee the sovereignty and security of all the people in Venezuela.
Chavez, a hero to some, a tyrant to others, led an anti-capitalist, anti-US movement during his time in charge, supporting poor Venezuelans and reclaiming power for them. The opposition leader, Enrique Capriles, has offered condolences to Chavez's family and supporters and urged unity among Venezuelans. Chavez has been very sick for more than 3 months now. There has been time for Venezuelans to understand the gravity of his health situation. But they likely will need even more time to come to grips with his death of the man who cast such a long shadow over this country for so long.
Okay, this is the scene now in Caracas at the military academy. That is the body of Hugo Chavez lying in state. It took 6 hours for the body to get to the hospital, to the military academy, where it will be until the funeral on Friday. Let's bring in our Latin America editor, Lucia Neumann, who is in the capital. So, Lucia, what's going to happen now?
Well, right now, as we are seeing, the president's body is lying in state. It is an open casket, so the people who will be going past his body will be able to see him. There have been no close-ups, though, of his face. That is considered in bad taste here in Venezuela. He is being accompanied by 3 Latin American leaders, the president of Argentina, Cristina Kirchner, of Uruguay, Pepe Mujica, and Evo Morales from Bolivia, all 3 of them very, very close to President Chavez. He is in a very simple casket, austere, I would say, especially by presidential standards, which is very interesting. Chavez himself was personally a very austere person. He lived in the palace in a small room, I'm told, in a tiny bed with very few frills or luxuries at all. So it's quite in keeping with his lifestyle, certainly in the last years of his life.
Hugo Chavez is dead. And he's being mourned by millions in his country. And he will definitely be missed by millions, if not billions, around the world. Probably Hugo Chavez's legacy will now be told to the world, as most people's legacies will be told after they're gone. With Hugo Chavez, he definitely made his mark on history. And this picture, by the way, is the last known picture with Chavez and his 2 daughters in his last few days with us. Now, Hugo Chavez, very simple casket, as you see, and he requested that. He did not want an elaborate casket, since he did not live an elaborate life. It was a very simple life, just like everybody else. And as you heard in the report, he lived in a small room, in a small bed in the palace. A man who has billions of dollars, well, not him, but he actually had the power to do a lot, and he did not. So Hugo Chavez is dead, and maybe we need to learn something about his socialism. By the way, Barack Obama and Hugo Chavez, I mean, they did meet a couple of times, and at one time Hugo Chavez wanted to give him a book. I think he gave it to him, and it does talk about socialism of the 21st century. Maybe Barack Obama can get some ideas from Hugo Chavez of how to actually distribute the wealth amongst the people, how distribute equality amongst the people in healthcare, education, and otherwise. Now, I'm not saying for the United States, even though Obama, a lot of people say he's a socialist, but let's not go too far with labeling people and thinking that someone is bad because he's a socialist, or I have no idea what I am. So don't label me because I don't know what I am. I'm not a socialist, I'm not a communist, I'm not liberal, I'm not conservative. I'm just middle of the road human being, just like most of you. Because most of you, when it comes down to it, and you look inside of you, even the ones who think they're conservative, which I think of myself as conservative. I signed, and my registration card says, my voter registration, it says Republican on it. Now, do I really feel I'm a Republican? No, but I like the conservative part of Republicans. That's why I basically signed as a Republican, or I chose Republican. Do I vote Republican in an election? No. Have I voted for Republican president? Yes, I have. I voted for Bush. The first time, that is. But the second time, no. Because, he tried to say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Well, he fooled me once, but he won the second time, though. But I did not vote for him. But anyway, forget about labels. At the end of the day, people are people. People have to live their lives. And all people want, now maybe there are elites, few elites up on top, but the majority of those countries, the majority of people, 99% of the people are the people who go to work, raise their children, try to live a decent life, and try to provide a decent living for their children. Now, how many people in each country actually are able to do that? Well, it depends on the country. In Venezuela, half of the people could not provide a decent living for their children. Now, 3/4 of the people there. So he failed to accomplish the 100%. And I don't know if you can ever accomplish 100%. But in 12 years, actually, bringing down the poverty level from 48% to 28%, that alone is a huge accomplishment. Well, let's see what Venezuela is and what Chavez was and what is going to be after Chavez in the next video.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. In Venezuela, President Hugo Chavez, after a long fight against cancer, lost that battle. He was a man who lost very few battles. Now joining us to talk about the life of Hugo Chavez and the significance of some of his achievements and some of his failures is Greg Wilpert. Greg's a sociologist who lived in Venezuela from 2000 to 2008. He taught at the Central University of Venezuela. He founded Venezuela Analysis, and he wrote the book Changing Venezuela by Taking Power, the History and Policies of the Chavez Government. Thanks very much for joining us, Greg.
Thanks for inviting me, Paul.
So let me ask you sort of a big general question. First, when history looks at the life of Hugo Chavez, what will people think will be his biggest, most significant historic achievement? And then we'll look at what might be looked at as his failure.
Well, it's going to be difficult to say because he's been such a controversial figure. I mean, perhaps one of the things that will stand out more than any other is precisely his controversy. Whereas, some obviously are saying that is people who support Chavez, such as myself, will say that he achieved a tremendous amount. He put socialism, the project of socialism, back on the map, on the world stage. He was one of the driving forces for Latin American integration, and he profoundly changed Venezuelan society, making it a much more egalitarian society than it was before he came into office. Of course, on the other side, there are people his detractors, who've been condemning him all along, and will say that he was a terrible dictator and things along those lines. It really depends, I guess, on who's writing the history books. So
let's assume the historian is honest and trying to tell the truth, and let's forget the biases. Let's start with the first part of what you said. It seems to me maybe the most significant thing he did is that he showed that, one, you can use the electoral process to take power and change the fundamental direction of a country. He was able to mobilize the army to support him in doing that, and that he could operate outside the sphere of influence of the United States and not break from the economic sphere. He still sold oil to the United States, and he couldn't break his economy away from the global economy, which is dominated by American and other kind of finance capital. But on a political level particularly, he was able to take a very independent direction, and that had a lot of influence on Latin America.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that he was very good at, was precisely to introduce very far-reaching changes in Venezuelan society, and to do it by peaceful means. And of course, one has to consider, though, one of the reasons he was able to do that is because he, in a sense, tricked the country's old elite. That is, when he first ran for office, he was promising a revolution, but he left the details very vague, and he had the support of a segment of the country's old elite. It wasn't only until shortly after he got elected that he actually showed that he meant what he said in his campaign, which is something that segment of the old elite that supported him really didn't expect. And then he radicalized, partly because of their resistance and after the coup attempt. And so, in other words, he got in through by means that are not exactly normal or usual. But once he was in, of course, he was kept on being legitimated through elections.
Yeah, to talk a little bit about that moment, that period during the coup, because if I understand it correctly, it really did radicalize him. That he didn't have such a worked out agenda in the beginning, but after the coup, it turned much more in a socialist direction.
Yes, definitely. After the coup, but not only after the coup, there was also the shutdown of the country's oil industry. After the coup, we actually moderated a little bit. It wasn't until after the shutdown of the oil industry, the strike, and the management walkout and lockout, that he, after he recovered from that he really became much more forceful in pushing ahead with a redistribution of the country's wealth, with the land reform, with a reform of the country's oil industry. And it wasn't really until his re-election in 2006 that he declared himself to be a socialist, seeking to institute a socialist society in Venezuela. Although he campaigned on that, but it wasn't really until 2006 that he laid out a more detailed program for that.
So, really quickly, just two or three of what you would consider the most important accomplishments, and then let's talk about things that he and his supporters hoped he would have accomplished and didn't. But start with some of the numbers of what was accomplished.
Well, I guess in the economic or socio-economic scale, there's the most important thing is having turned Venezuela from being one of the most unequal countries in Latin America to one of the most equal ones, or actually the most equal ones in terms of income. it's a complete turnaround, and that's quite dramatic. If you look at statistics about income inequality, Venezuela has now the least income inequality of South America, right after Cuba in any case. And then the other thing is that he halved the poverty rate. He decreased the extreme poverty rate by 2/3. So those are very important changes in people's standard of living that have taken place. Then in the political sphere, I think the most important change was really the democratization and participation of the population, democratization of the polity that took place to a large extent through measures such as the communal councils, people's participation in social programs, and the introduction of self-managed workplaces and cooperatives and things like that. And so as a result, Venezuela now is considered, or Venezuelans themselves consider their democracy to be one of the most, or more democratic than ever. On a scale of 1 to 10, they now rate their democracy much higher than they did before Chavez, and than citizens of other countries rate their respective democracies.
This is based on polling, you're saying?
Yes.
Right. So actually, before we get into what some of the things that didn't get accomplished, let me just ask one other question, because it goes so much to what may come next, which is, I think people who haven't been to Venezuela and haven't been into the barrios and places, they don't quite understand how deep this democratization has gone, that it isn't just about what happens at the top and who follows Chavez, that there's been structures created amongst the population in a general way, which I think is going to make it very difficult for things to go back.
Yes, I think so. I mean, the people have been mobilized to an extent that they've never been mobilized before, and they really feel like they have a part that is, I'm talking about the people who live in the barrios, in the poor communities, feel like they have a part of the governance of the country, and they will not let go of that, or at least not easily, should the opposition gain control again. And so that's going to be a problem, I think, if the opposition were to come into power and try to abolish these newly created structures.
Yeah, I mean, if the opposition is to win the election, and it's been already called, apparently the election is going to be 30 days, I think, from today, if I have it right, then I don't know how they govern, given the majority of the people have been so mobilized. Anyway, let me ask the question then. What do you think of the 2 or 3 things that he hoped, people that supported him hoped would have been accomplished by now, and were not?
Well, even though so much poverty has been decreased, it still hasn't been abolished.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we are going to actually go to the phones, if we can get to them. Caller, your own.
Dr. Tillawi.
Hey.
Dr. Tillawi.
I wasn't, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you.
You know who this is.
Of course I know. This is Mark.
Yes, I have a few comments concerning the passing of the President of Venezuela. First and foremost, how many people do you think you would see out in the streets crying in America if the American president were to pass like that?
That's a good question.
Well, I think there would be people in the streets. Let me just specify that. There would be people in the streets, but would you see the kind of outpouring?
Well, I'll tell you what, we have seen that kind of outpouring of affections when JFK was assassinated by the Zionists.
Yes, absolutely, yes. But we would not see that if Barack Obama were to die. We would not have seen that if George Bush were to have died.
God forbid.
Or Bill Clinton. We don't produce leaders like Hugo Chavez anymore.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. I guess if we do have a president who comes from, like Chavez did, you know, even though Barack Obama supposedly he came in from, you know, working family, single parent, etc. But I think the powers that be has brought him to play the character that he is.
Yeah, he may have come from lowly beginnings, but he does not work for the people of the United States.
That's correct. He works for the powers.
The interests of a foreign power.
The powers, yes.
Yes. Okay, that's the first point that I want to make, number one. Number two, what you mentioned at the beginning of the program concerning what the poverty rate of Venezuela was before Chavez took office, and then what it was afterwards, this is a very similar story. This is exactly what also happened to take place, not coincidentally, with the nation of Iran. Iran was obviously another oil-rich country that was being dominated by foreign oil interests and financial interests, and the people of Iran were absolutely impoverished. They were uneducated. All they could do was to go enslave in the oil fields for the benefit of the British, who were stealing that oil and giving only a pittance of the profits of that oil back in the form of bribes to what was the Iranian government at that time. And so we can see why there would be the kind of hatred in the American ruling class for Venezuela, or for Chavez, the way that they have for Ahmadinejad. Did you happen to read the op-ed written by Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post concerning the death of Chavez?
No, what did she say?
Oh, you've got to read this. I mean, if anybody had any kind of doubt as to whether or not there is an agenda being played here in terms of not just our government but our media, go and read the nauseating piece written by Jennifer Rubin about the death of Hugo Chavez and how he was a dictator, he was a tyrant, he hated Jews, all of this stuff. So, it's the same game being played here, Hesham, is that, capitalism, like you, I'm not a capitalist, I'm not a communist, I'm not a socialist, I'm just a father who's trying to feed his family, and I make decisions that are in the best interest, or I hope that are in the best interest of my family. But coming from a very conservative background that I used to come from, and I'm still very conservative, as you know, but nonetheless, all of this rhetoric that we have been fed from the likes of Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, the socialists only exist, they only pop up because of rampant capitalism. Okay, socialism exists because its opposite, meaning rampant capitalism, is the dominating paradigm. If the capitalists were not given free rein to walk all over the people and to steal literally the bread out of the mouths of their children, we wouldn't have socialists. But if Hugo Chavez is the definition of what socialism is, then go ahead and call me a socialist.
That is true. And by the way, I said, when you said your family, I said 9 children, but you did not hear me. You did not hear me when I said 9 children.
No, I didn't, but you forgot my 2 grandkids.
Oh yeah, now it's 11. But listen,
I'm on the move, Hesham.
Yeah, you're on a roll. But listen, it's not just Jennifer Rubin. It's also, every, I guess let's call them conservative, whatever the heck that means.
Neoconservative.
Yeah, talk show, which is basically, that's all we have on the airwaves, especially down here where I'm at. They're calling him a dictator and the worst dictator, and calling him Hitler, and calling him all kind of names. And it's like, did you see what he did? Or why don't you talk about his accomplishment? This man came from nowhere, started a political party, and won an election. And even if his claim to fame is bringing 1/4 of the population of Venezuela, which is like about 9 million, I think, if he brought 1/4 of them within 10 years out of poverty, that's an accomplishment in itself.
Well, Hesham,
yeah.
If he had dropped his support of the Palestinians, if he had dropped his friendship with Iran, and if he had, and he could have been 10 times the quote-unquote brutal dictator that they claim him to be now. But if he had dropped his support of the Palestinians, dropped his support of Iran, and taken a pro-Israel stance, they wouldn't be vilifying his memory now as a dictator. They would be crying and saying, "Oh, we've lost one of the great world leaders that the humanity was capable of producing."
That is true. That is true. I think he really went fast because I think he's been sick for the last couple of years. Has it been that long? No. I think a year.
Yes, it's been 2 years. 2 years.
But the one I remember for him, and it's like I guess the one moment that I remember for him back, I think it was 2006, I believe, at the United Nations, when he, I think George Bush spoke the day before, and he said that the devil was in this room yesterday, and he did the crucifixion sign, and he said he can still smell the sulfur at the podium. But of course, we have to remember when he said that, that at that time, George Bush was slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq and in Afghanistan. So when he said that, that's what that was. But, how do you deal, Mark? Because I have had some people say that if you, if you're talking good about him, or if you're mourning him, or if you are, that means you're a communist or a socialist. How do you deal with that?
Well, what I would tell them, and this is the debate that I've been having lately with people over this issue of socialized medicine, as they call it. They say, "Oh, Obamacare, it's going to destroy us, and it's going to..." And what I ask them is, I say, listen, does the United States have the most efficient military in the world? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Does anybody do it better in terms of fighting wars than the United States military? Oh, no, nobody's better than us. Okay, well, guess what? We have a socialized military, okay? It's paid for by tax dollars. It is managed by the government, and yet somehow we managed to put together the most efficient killing machine on the planet. Now, if we can put together the most efficient killing machine on the planet, we can probably put together the best medical system on the planet as well. Now, these people that you're talking about, Hesham, who react with these Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity type of responses about you being a communist and all the rest of that, you can't really reach these people. These are people who go to the church of Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. So you're not going to be able. It's like George Orwell's 1984. The sheep were very easy it was very easy to get them to memorize slogans, and the slogan for a while was 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the sheep were very good at memorizing and repeating those slogans. So you're dealing with people like this when they accuse you of being a communist. And what I would remind them is, I would say, listen, if Chavez is the definition of communism, then that means that the whole world is communist. Okay, the United States, we live in a socialized country, okay? If you pay into Social Security, look at that first word there, social, okay? We have socialist systems
something,
all over the world.
Mark, all you have to do is look at our income tax.
Yes.
This is time to file income tax. And if people know, you see, a lot of people don't know. If people know that people get thousands of dollars on their income tax return in probably one of the most obvious socialist system ever created, because at the end of the year, people who did not put a penny into the system get thousands of dollars back. That is socialism. But something, you said that if we were able to create the most efficient killing machine on earth, I might add, we should be able to create the most efficient living machine on earth.
That's right.
And by the way, no one accused me of being a socialist or a communist, but I have seen, going through like Facebook in the last couple of days, I have seen some comment that communists now are mourning the death of Hugo Chavez, and it's like, no, it's not communist. It's decent people, just people who care about other people, people who care to actually mourn the death of a decent man. Even though, sometimes we think that these presidents can actually do magic. Well, he did his magic, but one man within 14 years cannot actually get everything, or 13 years, cannot do everything he needs to do. It takes ages. It takes generations to actually get a country to where it should be. Now, it's true, the government, any government is a corrupt government. Any system of government is able to be corrupted. So if people say, well, there was corruption in his system, show me one system of government that does not have corruption. Just one system of government. There is no way that you're going to find one system of government that does not have corruption. But at the end, what really counts is what is happening on the ground. Is the country going into a positive direction, or is the country going into a negative direction? And I think on all aspects, on health, on education, on democracy, on defense, on the lifestyle that Venezuelans have, I think he has an A+ on all of those areas, and many more. I mean, we can go through down through the systems that a government's supposed to take care of, economic, education, etc., etc. I think he has done a wonderful, if not a magical, job while he was ruling Venezuela. And look at it. He requested that his funeral, he did not want a huge elaborate funeral that's going to cost a lot of money, and he did not get that. He wanted a funeral, and we do have, by the way, we go into, after the call, we are going to show a little clip of the funeral he had. It was not an elaborate funeral with hundreds of thousands of or thousands of army soldiers marching with a cannon drive, whatever. No, it was a populous funeral where the people who loved him came out to tell him goodbye and thank you.
Yes, and I think that the lesson that we need to take away from this, Hesham, if I may be so bold to say, is that at the end of the day, the bottom line is that he has people out in the streets who are genuinely weeping over the fact that he is gone, like a father has passed. Now, the United States and all of these other Western countries, if their leaders drop dead today, you would see people out in the streets, except what it would be like Mardi Gras in New Orleans. Okay, people would be out celebrating over the fact that all of these mafiosi have dropped dead, and that's the only difference, is that in Venezuela they are lamenting their loss, whereas in the West we would be cheering for it.
Okay, don't say bad things about Mardi Gras, because remember, we are now, you are way up there in the middle of Snowtown, but we are down here in Mardi Gras country, and we like it. Anyway, as Mark Glenn, thanks Mark for the thanks for the call. Anyway, well, we're going to show you a little clip. It's not long; it's just very little, of Hugo Chavez funeral.
it deceived me. Allah بيهدي العالم هذا.
Just like he wanted. He lived amongst the people, fought amongst the people, struggled amongst the people, and he died amongst the people. Hugo Chavez, the president of the people. Not just his people, but the oppressed people and the freedom-loving people around the world. Hugo Chavez, we only have a few minutes left, but before we actually go, we are going to pay tribute to Hugo Chavez with this next video. Hopefully you will enjoy it.
Cuentan que cuando un silencio aparecía entre dos, era que pasaba un ángel que les robaba la voz. Y hubo tal silencio el día que nos tocaba olvidar, que de tal suerte yo todavía no terminé de callar. Todo empezó en la sorpresa, en un encuentro casual, pero la noche es traviesa cuando se teje el azar. Sin querer se hace una ofrenda que pacta con el dolor, o pasa un ángel, se hace leyenda y se convierte en amor. Ahora comprendo cuál era el ángel que entre nosotros pasó. Era el más terrible, el implacable, el más feroz. Ahora comprendo en total este silencio mortal. Ángel que pasa, besa y te abraza, ángel para un final. Todo empezó en la sorpresa, en un encuentro casual, pero la noche es traviesa cuando se teje el azar. Sin querer se hace una ofrenda que pacta con el dolor, o pasa un ángel, se hace leyenda y se convierte en amor. Ahora comprendo cuál era el ángel que entre nosotros pasó. Era el más terrible, el implacable, el más feroz. Ahora comprendo en total este silencio mortal. Ángel que pasa, besa y te abraza, ángel para un final.
It's definitely a different look, different view of what you probably have been hearing the last couple of days on the airwaves, especially if you listen to talk radio or maybe on the Fox network or others. Basically, we wanted to, we are always ready to give you the other side of things, and you can make up your own mind. Now, we are, like I said, I'm not a Venezuelan, and I'm not a communist, and I'm not a socialist. I don't have to actually explain myself that way. But to me, I think he was a decent human being, regardless of what others might think of him. And that was Hugo Chavez. We just wanted to pay tribute to him tonight and hopefully bring you more information. And definitely, it is worth it to actually research the life of Hugo Chavez, because he definitely had done a tremendous job as president. And just like Mark Glenn said with the Army, if we are able to do that, I think we can do a lot more with health care. And at the same time, we need to be careful when we listen to these talk show hosts. Like I listened a couple of times to some guy named Andy on the local radio here. Well, I think he's nationwide. He's one of those neocon weirdos, and but he was calling him a dictator, and he also said, well, another dictator bites the dust, just like Gaddafi did. Well, Gaddafi did a lot for his people, and we know now that this democracy thing that killed Gaddafi, supposedly, it was nothing but a plot, nothing but a plot by the CIA to actually take over that country for the benefit of Israel, just like the CIA is trying to take over Syria for the benefit of Israel. And probably one country that was so happy today that Hugo Chavez is dead is the state of Israel, or as I call it, the bastardized state of Israel. Because he was a thorn in its side, and that's how he lived his life, a thorn in the side of imperialism and Zionism, which unfortunately it's becoming one, because it is ruled by one power, and that is the power of Zionism. Well, again, all we have time left is to basically tell you good night, but before we go, we want to also say we salute you, sir, and meet you on the other side. We will be here not next week, but the week after. As you know, we are here every other week, 8 o'clock. Goodbye and good night, and may God bless you. Rest in peace.